Greetings. My name is Jeff Smith, minister for the Haymarket Church of Christ, and I'd like to speak to you today about the creation-evolution controversy and some milestones along the way. The Bible begins with a very simple but comprehensive statement. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Throughout the Bible, this idea of God as creator and sustainer is assumed and affirmed throughout. Colossians 1:16 tells us that for by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. Revelation 4:11, worthy are you, our Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they existed and were created. And so not only there a reaffirmation of God as creator and sustainer, but it says that an implication of that is that he is worthy to receive glory and honor and power by his creative act. That God then is creator and sustainer of the universe is taught from cover to cover in the Bible. And the book of Romans tells us that this fact is an obvious fact. Romans chapter 1 verses 19 and 20, for what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made, so that they are without excuse. So it's no secret, it's clearly understandable as we look about, whether we're looking around with a microscope or a telescope or just with our eyes and experiencing creation, we ought to understand as we look and see the marvelous things that this had to have all been created by someone. But that Bible teaching that is taught from cover to cover and is obvious from our looking about in this world is not readily accepted anymore. And so there's been, especially for the past couple hundred years, a controversy between creation and evolution. And I thought today we might consider that controversy and some significant milestones along the way. First, reviewing the last 2,000 years, we can divide it into three different types of worldviews, I guess you could say: pre-modernism, modernism, and postmodernism. We define pre-modernism as a time period from the time of Christ through into the Renaissance, and we'd say then that most folks would believe that truth could be known, but that truth would be revealed by God. Modernism, defined from the Renaissance to mid-20th century, would be the idea of, or the prevailing idea, mindset would be that truth could be known, but it would be known by empiricism or rationalism, experimenting, observing to learn what truth is, or by reasoning it out. From the mid-20th century till the present, we live in a postmodern age, and in that age, most folks would think that truth is a relative thing. You can have yours and I can have mine, but there isn't any overarching truth that's appropriate for all people. So briefly then, pre-modernism, postmodernism, modernism, the three different eras that help us understand how we view truth. Definitely for the past 200 years, creationists and evolutionists have been engaged in a battle over the teaching of creation or evolution, and mostly this battle takes place in public science classrooms. And by the way, if you were in a public school classroom through the Dark Ages and the Middle Ages and even through into the Renaissance, you were doing pretty well. But creation was accepted and taught in all of those, most of those schools. But in our postmodern era, especially in the United States, creation is not taught in any public school. So let me review some of the breakthroughs or changes that have led to this radical shift from teaching creation to teaching evolution. In 1828, Friedrich Wöhler accomplished a reaction that was later named after him, the Wohler synthesis, where he produced an organic compound, urea, from inorganic reactants, potassium cyanate and ammonium chloride. It's an interesting reaction in that before that, I believe we understood that, or we supposed that you'd have to have an organic substance to react and produce an organic substance. But to take an inorganic reactant and produce an organic compound suggested that that might have just happened, and that even, making a big jump from there, that life may possibly come from non-living through some sort of a reaction. And I think that's where we get the idea that perhaps the primordial soup or the primordial ooze could have then, with some right conditions and enough time, given rise to organic substances and then ultimately to life. I think Wohler's synthesis is what planted that seed. Just 2 years later, Charles Lyell published his Principles of Geology, and he championed the principle of uniformitarianism, that the reaction rates that we observe are assume that they are constant. They could produce what we see, and kind of taking observations in our lifetime, extrapolating those back, assuming that the reactions are uniform, led him to conclude that the Earth must be very, very old. An old Earth mindset really came forth or was promoted by Lyell. In 1859, Charles Darwin published On the Origin of the Species after going through and considering all the samples that he collected on that famous voyage on the HMS Beagle, and certainly an amazing volume of samples that he looked at and considered. He had been a student or influenced by Charles Lyell in his ideas, and he, of course, put forth the idea that we observe variation in species from one generation to the next. Some of those variations are helpful and are positive changes. Some are negative. The positive changes help something survive. Negative changes don't. The fittest survive. And through that idea of variation and natural selection, that offers a plausible explanation for how all species might have come to exist. So those seeds planted by Wohler and Lyell and Darwin caught on and brought forth fruit, and the idea of teaching evolution in a public school gained popularity, but it was resisted in Tennessee, and the Butler Act set forth in Tennessee prohibited any teaching on human origins that contradicted the Bible account, and that came forth in 1925. Also in that year, the famous Scopes monkey trial. John Scopes, teacher in a public high school, was prosecuted for teaching evolution in that school. And you may recall that it was Clarence Darrow and William Jennings Bryant who showed up to argue each different side in this trial. It was 42 years later that teaching evolution became legal in Tennessee. Tennessee repealed the Butler Act, and they did begin formally teaching evolution. And it was just a year later that the Supreme Court ruled in a case, Epperson versus Arkansas, that any state ban on teaching evolution was unconstitutional. And they figured that on the basis of the First Amendment, that Congress should make no law respecting an establishment of religion. So by relegating the fact of creation to a religious statement, they excluded it from being banned. They said you couldn't ban teaching evolution. In 1980, Michael Behe wrote a book called Darwin's Black Box, describing his theory of intelligent design. And this is science then, not a really religious origin. Just saying scientifically, you can look at creation and say, with all this design in creation, there must have been a designer. And this is significant because here is science saying there has to be a designer and not religion. In 2005, there was a court case in Pennsylvania, Kitzmiller versus Dover Area School District. The school district decided that they were going to require presentation of intelligent design theory as an alternative to evolution in their school curriculum, but that ruling was overturned. And higher courts said you can't say that intelligent design needs to be taught. And pretty recently, just a little less than 10 years ago, down in Texas, there was a 21st Century Science Coalition, and they put forth these scientifically sound curriculum standards. And in those, they said that instruction on evolution is vital to understanding all the biological sciences. You've got to make it clear in your curriculum that evolution is an easily observable phenomenon that has been documented beyond any reasonable doubt. And if you're going to teach something, it has to be based on the latest peer-reviewed scholarship. And here's an interesting one, number 4. They encourage vital critical thinking and scientific reasoning by leaving out all references to strengths and weaknesses of the theory of evolution, which politicians have used to introduce supernatural explanations into science courses. I just think that one's the most ironic. Encourage valid critical thinking by not talking about strengths and weaknesses of a theory. And then number 5, recognize that all students are best served when matters of faith are left to families and houses of worship. It certainly appears that this debate is going to continue for the foreseeable future here in these United States. I'll put to you, though, a logical consequence of this. As long as creationism is denied, morality and, of course, faith in God are weakened. And as we saw from that Revelation reference as we were beginning, if creation is denied, then folks are very ready to deny God the honor and the glory that he is due. It's a fallacy to think that creation requires faith to believe, but evolution does not. Actually, it takes more faith to embrace evolution than it does to embrace creation. Notice this quote from Evolution for Naturalists, written by Darlington. He says, "It's a fundamental evolutionary generalization that no external agent imposes life or matter. Matter takes the forms it does because it has the inherent capacity to do so. This is one of the most remarkable and mysterious facts about our universe, that matter exists, that has the capacity to form itself into the most complex patterns of life." What he's saying there is basically, I know it's amazing to think that matter inherently has the ability to do this, but it does. Trust me. And even though we don't understand it, we have to believe it. Doesn't that sound like a statement of faith to you? And that's the kind of faith that you need to believe evolution. As we said at the start, the Bible teaches creation from cover to cover. And when we understand God as creator, we understand that he is worthy to receive glory, honor, power, and even obedience, if you will, by his creative act. And so the church needs to continue teaching this reality, creationism, this truth, no matter what the world teaches, and hope that the pendulum might swing back the other way and that more folks might accept what God has taught about the origin of the universe. This has been a very quick view of a very complicated subject, but just some milestones of the creation-evolution controversy over the past 200 years. Whatever happens in the world, I invite you individually to recognize God as creator, to center your relationship with him, and begin helping you draw closer and stay in a right relationship with our Heavenly Father. The Haymarket Church of Christ meets at 6945 Gillis Way in Gainesville, Virginia, and you can reach us via the contact information on the screen. We assemble for Bible study at 9:30 a.m. Sunday and for worship 10:30 a.m. Sunday, and we also meet Wednesday nights at 7:30 for Bible study. We invite you to come and join us anytime you're available to do so. If you have questions or comments, we invite you to send them to us at haymarketcofc@live.com or call us at 571-261-8535. Take care and God bless.